This lesson will explain the controls for the pneumatic system. The air bleed control panel is located on the overhead panel. We'll start with an explanation of the HP valve. Then we'll look at the engine bleed valve and the APU bleed valve. Finally, we'll examine the crossfeed valve in all its configurations. The HP valve is spring-loaded closed if there's no electrical supply or no air pressure. Air is normally bled from the IP stage, but at low engine thrust, the pressure from the IP stage alone is not sufficient, so air is automatically bled from the HP stage. When the HP valve is open, air is bled from the HP stage only. When an HP valve push button is released out, the corresponding valve closes. Close the left HP valve now. Select the left HP valve to see what happens when it's closed. Close the right HP valve now. When the HP valve is selected off manually, the ECAM shows the valve in amber because this is not a normal configuration. Here we see the engine bleed valves. The green flow bar indicates that the valve is controlled open. This indication is not reliable when there's no air bleed from the engine, for example, when the engine is shut down. The actual air pressure exiting the engine 1 bleed valve is shown on the pressure gauge. Pressure values are also shown on the ECAM page. Let's see what happens when we switch off one of the engine bleed valves. Close engine 1 bleed valve. With the engine bleed valve closed, there's soon not enough pressure to keep the pack valve open. The APU bleed valve controls the supply of bleed air from the APU. The APU can be used to supply the air conditioning system, even while in flight, with some limitations. Refer to ATA 49 APU. The APU is running, as is shown by this symbol on the ECAM page. Let's switch on the APU bleed and see what happens. First, the APU bleed valve opens, and both the engine bleed valves close. The APU is now supplying the bleed air. The crossfeed valve opens automatically and shows fault momentarily while the valve is in transit. Now the crossfeed valve is fully open and the green APU flow bar is shown on the panel. Now let's reverse the process. We'll switch the APU bleed valve off. Switch the APU bleed off now and watch what happens. Select the highlighted APU bleed switch again to see what happens when it's selected off. As you see, we're back to where we started. The engine bleed valves have opened to take over the air bleed function, and the crossfeed valve has closed. If the crossfeed valve was in manual mode, it would not have opened and closed, as we've just seen. We'll look at this in the next topic. The crossfeed valve has a manual and an auto mode. It's normally operated automatically, and in this mode, pushing the crossfeed push button has no effect on the valve position. But when you're in manual mode, the crossfeed can be manually controlled. Normally, in automatic mode, this push button is not lit, following the lights out philosophy. Manual mode is indicated when manual comes on the push button. Engage manual crossfeed mode now. No, this is the valve push button. The crossfeed mode push button is just below. The crossfeed valve is now in manual control. Now let's change the valve position. The crossfeed valve is now in line. Note its position on the ECAM and the flow bar on the panel. To conclude our look at the crossfeed valve, we'll put it back to automatic. The fault light comes on during valve transit in automatic mode, but the ECAM doesn't register a fault. In the free play topic, you'll have a chance to experiment with all the crossfeed possibilities. As we've seen, the crossfeed valve can be controlled manually, but usually its operation is automatic. The crossfeed valve closes automatically when, for example, the APU bleed valve is switched to off reset, air is bled from engine 1 or 2, or the APU or engine fire handle is pulled.